have some fun. Everybody's spread out equally here. You got your own quadrants, so
Do you want us to move in closer? Or we're good?
So we'll try to go through, we'll have lots of time for questions. We'll show you quite a few things. You know, we do conifers here in the fall, we do shrub classes, we do all kinds of stuff, but to me, this is a little bit more kind of winter interest. You know, when we've got conifers. Yesterday we talked about kind of the bones of the garden, you know, structure, color, texture, all the rest of it. Well, that's big. What do I have that I can put on the border that's still going to look nice, you know, through the winter time? You know, give me a little flower on some of this stuff, but certainly have nice foliage and a little bit of winter interest as well. The vast majority of this is exactly the things I tuck in my pots too. That's the other thing. You know, we as gardeners always have a little tired annuals this time of year. You know, if we look at grasses, heucheras, ferns, depending on where a container is, it's a really easy way to freshen up your pots. And if you're a plant addict like me, then you can sneak it in on the wife. Then well, no, that's been there all year, honey. I just put a couple new things in around it, and then next spring we can take the plant out, put it in the yard, and we can buy something else for the pots. And we recycle the plants that way. So we'll start with the little, this is going to be evergreen. I don't have everything left in stock. I'll mention a couple things, but we certainly got a lot to choose from still. We do try to keep most of this around for the year. Number one on the sheet is always Hellebores. We used to just do a specific Hellebore class, and we'll talk a lot about Hellebores here, but this is kind of the substitute for old Hellebore class in the fall, you know, where we just focus on that. Now we'll talk those and then some other cool stuff as well. This is the time for Hellebores. I mean, if you come in here in May, you come in here in June, you come in here in July, a lot of people come in spring and ask for them, and it's just like there's nothing around. You can't find them. We can't find them in the spring. So this is the time of year right now. They start coming in maximum selection here through the winter months. So typically you come in now, November, you're going to get one big batch, and then we come back after the holidays in January, early February, we get into the Orientalis type Hellebores, more the ones that bloom January through April. But if I took a November to April, I can find a Hellebore that's going to give me color for a good 2-3 months. I mean, that's the number one flowering plant to me in the wintertime. Super hardy, easy to grow. I think probably everybody's got Hellebores in their yard a little bit these days. There's always new varieties. I would say going back, you know, for me, I think it was probably the second or third flower and garden show. I can remember going with my mother, you know, in the early 90s, like 91, 92, to the Seattle Flower and Garden Show, and going to the Heronswood booth and paying Mr. Hinckley $50 for 2 4-inch Hellebore plants because they had double flowers and they're supposed to stand up a little bit more. Of course, 2 years later, I could have bought one at the nursery I ran for $10 because then everybody had them pretty close after. But that's probably the biggest difference. You know, in 30 years of breeding, we've gone from nice plant, nothing wrong with it, flowers kind of open and hang down, they don't see them quite as much. There's a few colors, but nothing like there is today. And now with modern breeding, it's foliage, it's variegation, flowers are upright, the flower counts through the roof. I mean, all the above. I mean, just far superior varieties now than what we had access to even 10 years ago, to be frank. So we have quite a bit in now. I've got a few still coming. Like I said, they'll keep coming in all winter time. We book a lot of different Hellebores, probably 30 kinds here typically over the course of the winter to have for folks. You'll see a few I brought in. The biggest thing I would say is, you know, I think they're all pretty in flower. We can probably all agree on that. I can pick my white, my pink, my red, my purplish, all different colors in the rainbow. I can pick what I want, but when it's not blooming in spring, in summer, and fall, what does it look like? And I think that's one of the hugest difference. I mean, just beautiful variegated mottled foliage. You know, that's going to be a beautiful plant when it's not in bloom. You know, and then I've got the bonus of having the flowers, you know, in the winter, early spring when nothing else is really flowering. So great foliage. You'll see, I think this one's Moon Dance. So that's Molly's white. You can see Moon Dance, old growth, new growth, you know, kind of, again, a beautiful modeling on it. You'll see some hints of pink in that variegation too. It's really pretty. And then again, a zillion different flowers we can choose from. So lots of cool Hellebores. It just kind of, again, depends on what your taste is as far as variety, the color, and then we can always find a nice foliage if you give us a flower too. Some a little smaller, some just a little bit bigger, but even the largest ones here, you're talking about something that might just be 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet tall on some of the species, and 1.5 feet to maybe 3 feet wide on some of the larger species as well. Yes.
Do they do best now? if you plant them like where they'll get sun in the spring and then get shaded out?
Well, it's a great question on kind of where to plant them, because I've been playing with these for literally 30 years, and I think everybody thinks of them as a deep dark shade plant. I don't think that's the case, to be honest. They certainly will do some shade. I wouldn't do deep dark shade. I've got some Hellebores in where they get pretty much sun all morning until 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then a little shader late in the day, or the opposite, shade all morning, and then I do get some mid-afternoon, late afternoon, evening sun in the summer, and I don't have sunburn. I don't have any issues at all. The biggest thing in where to site these, they're great. They are great for dry shade. I mean, if I have old trees, I'm looking for something I can fill underneath, have some foliage, and not just mulch with plants. That's a great choice, as well as some others that really will help out a little bit. I mean, that's something I don't have to water much. It doesn't mind the acidity. Very, very low maintenance. Yeah, so good spots for that. A couple of things with Hellebores, I would say this. The complaints I've heard for 30 years, typically on this in our neck of the woods, is bugs. So if I have old Hellebores and I don't do anything with them, and I walk out in spring, a lot of times on the bottom of the leaf, I've got all kinds of aphids. I got whiteflies. I got easy bugs. They're not hard to get rid of. But if I was a little sugar-sucking guy like one of those, that's where I'd want to hang out too in the winter. I'm sheltered. I've got unlimited supply of foliage juice to keep myself happy for the winter, and then off we go for spring. Now, the easiest way I can spray, I got neem oil, I got insecticidal soap. It's an easy thing to spray. I've never sprayed my Hellebores once in my yard, ever, any of them, for any reason. And the reason is walk out in the holidays, cut the foliage off. Let them start over again. Why waste your time doing this with neem oil or spray? It will work, but I would rather, it's literally, I'm not to give you my birthday, but I'm a Christmas baby, so this usually, my wife's like, what do you want to do on Christmas? As I go work in the yard for a couple hours. So I usually go out on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning every year for 20 something years, and I go around all my clumps of Hellebores and I just grab my yard waste bucket, and she's like, don't cut all the leaves off. Yeah, I'm cutting all the leaves off. I want to see the flowers. So I literally go to the base, every leaf, good or bad, comes off, goes in the yard waste, and off it goes to the thing. And in a couple of weeks, I've got a brand new crown. I can see the flowers because there's no foliage hiding them, and I got brand new fresh foliage that doesn't have bugs or any other issue, and then off we go. It doesn't matter how cold it is, doesn't matter anything. I've never had a problem doing that. Now, I'm not saying you have to, but typically the folks that complain about maybe the whitefly, the aphid sometimes on the leaves, if they do cut them back, I'm good to go. If I just chop them off, let them start over again, and I got a brand new plant for the next season. That's the only time of year I ever touch mine, to be honest with you. Okay. So the two issues I mentioned to me would be the bugs on hiding out in the winter mainly, and then the other would be Hellebore blight. So if I walk out in my garden and I see black stems, shriveled leaves, spotting on the foliage, that needs to be cleaned up again, and that is something I probably would spray for with something like, I brought some copper fungicide in, or funginil. I want to make sure I soak that crown so when the new growth comes back out, it's not infected either way. Now, there's probably a reason why you got Hellebore blight. Is it crowded? Is it too much shade? It's usually too wet. If we don't have adequate drainage and they're too wet, sometimes that will get us the Hellebore blight a little bit as well. So I would check those things to correct them before you assume it's never coming back again. And usually a spray and it's taken care of. I've had one of mine underneath an old roadie in the back that did get it years and years ago. That's exactly what I did in spring. Removed the foliage again, sprayed the crown, new leaves came back out, sprayed them one more time, never saw it again after that. So very, very easy, I think, to get rid of. If I walk away and don't do anything, you might lose your plant. It's going to infect the crown, and I'll probably end up losing the plant a little bit. So good drainage is always key. We can have it in shade, but not heavy clay, not squishy water, soil in the wintertime. We want to make sure that it drains really well too, okay? So anything you guys got on Hellebores, I mean, ask away, because this is a pretty big topic, and it's one of the more popular plants up in our neck of the woods. Yes?
Babies.
So we get lots of babies. Some of them seed more than others. Now, you can go two ways. A couple of mine, I intentionally let them go to seed. I'm a little OCD, so some other ones I don't want them to go to seed. I like my clump. I don't need little volunteers. So if I want to propagate them, that's the easiest way to do. When they bloom, don't deadhead them. Let the seeds dry, mature. Usually by late summer, fall, you won't see them, but they'll drop those seeds into the soil the next year you'll have little tiny sprouts popping up everywhere, and you probably have a little variation, you know, as far as color. I can dig them up, I can transplant them. I typically pop mine up and send them down to the Arboretum plant sale or something, you know, to help raise money. But very easy one to let go to seed.
I had a white one and a pink one that I planted together. And I get all kinds of weird and wonderful combinations.
Oh yeah, yeah, all
it's
kinds.
really cool.
Always going to get seed. That's originally what Hellebore was 30 years ago. You had, it wasn't a name variety, you know, Anna's Red or Molly's White or this. It was typically a mix, like Royal Heritage mix or Mardi Gras mix. And so every plant was a little bit different, you know. And then again, when we got our seeds, it was the same way. That's kind of fun too, you know, to do something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Surprise in the garden.
Yeah, so watch the. So, and again, we talked about the landscape. You know, this is a plant, a lot of times, again, I will pop into my containers for winter interest, enjoy it for the winter, let it bloom. Maybe it's another year in the pot's fine, and then those will go out to the landscape down the road. So it doesn't just have to be, I go put them in the yard. I can use them in pots, I can use them in the yard. In the pots, a lot of times it's one, but in the yard, a lot of times for me, it's three. I'm not interested in just having one. It's like, well, let me put 3 of them in a little block to really make a nice impact somewhere that I'm going to enjoy them here for the winter time too. Okay. So Hellebore is very fun for feeding. You know, I brought in the rose and flower food, and this is really for all the stuff we're talking about today. I don't need to put a lot of food on any of this, but if I'm going to feed my Hellebores, it's usually typically right coming out of winter. I'll put a little dose around the edge of it, maybe when it starts to bloom in January, February. Put a little compost around it, cover it up. That feeds it for spring. If I really want to give it a kick, or maybe it didn't flower quite as much as it has before, I'll put one more dose on there. You know, we get towards that late May, early June time. That'll give me a little extra flower power here for that next season. Okay, so very easy to feed too. Now I brought one of these in. Does anyone have this shovel? So that is a kind of Conan the Barbarian weapon. It's pretty lethal. Don't get it on your toes. It's pretty sharp. But that's probably the best shovel I own, especially we get to this time of year and we start talking about dividing things, transplanting things. Very good time of year in the dormant time to, you know, divide my clump of this or that, or add a new plant in. That's a great sharp shovel if you're looking for an easy tool to kind of have around for those kinds of projects. We sell an awful lot of the radius tools these days too. That's a great little shovel to try. Now we talked about pruning a little bit. I'll let you guys look at the species on there. And again, we've got quite a bit in now. There's a lot more coming in next week and the week after. I mean, Hellebores keep coming in here all through the fall and the winter. But again, if you're looking to add some, grab them quick or leave your name for a specific one you're kind of looking for, and we'll do our best to get it in as well. Yeah, because it's probably coming in at some point. This is the time of year we're at the whims of the growers. If it's not ready to go, then they won't give it to us. So we have to wait until it's rooted in and kind of ready to ship, and then we grab them into the store. Okay. Now the second one here I have on the list is Heucheras, and that's probably the other large chunk. You can see I brought up a little rainbow of foliage. I have Heucheraitis. That's the addiction to Heucheras. My wife will tell you the same thing. I have way too many. I think I brought like 5 more home this fall that I really don't have anywhere to put, but I'll find somewhere to put them. Heucheras, I think, are a fabulous plant. Some people have struggled a little bit with them here and there, talking to customers, but I think it comes down to choosing the right variety for the right amount of sun. And I'm kind of our trial guy for Heucheras. I take them home and I play with them, and if it's just, I'm like, don't get that one anymore, get this one instead. Because there's so many, I could probably pull out 8 of them and put them all side to side. There's subtle differences, but it's purple, or it's red, or it's lime, or it's orangey. They've got similar colors, but some varieties are better for sun, some for shade. My big thing with Heucheras is rust. You know, and if we have bad air circulation, we put a shady one in sun, a sunny one in shade. That's when you tend to get foliage issues on them. And it's certainly correctable with some cleaning and a little bit of spray again with the copper fungicide. But I'd rather not let, you know, I'm trying to lighten my maintenance, not make more of it. So anything new comes out, like I said, I usually take them home, play with it in the pot, throw it in the ground, try it in the sun, try it in the shade, see how it does. And if I get the rust on it, I'll usually clean it up once, spray it, try it again in a different spot. If it gets it again, you know what? Let's get a different one. That one's not really so good for our local area. Yeah.
The reddy purple ones back there.
Yep.
I have a couple of them that are very, very happy.
Yep.
And every other one I've planted has keeled over and died.
Well, we'd have to look at plant by plant what's going on, but typically with Heuchera, I would say it's kind of like Hellebore, it's too wet,
That could
or it's a sunshade issue, because this is, again, it doesn't look like it, but these are very drought tolerant. I've got some in areas that hardly got watered at all this summer, and they are still thriving.
Okay.
If I have them in areas I water a lot, they do tend to struggle a little bit more. Some of the ones on my border that I got to water something else will tend to be a little more stunted and, again, a little bit more rest.
Somebody told me, a friend of mine who's a really good gardener said that there's something that gets into the roots that'll kill them.
Well, there is some things under the soil that might nibble on the roots, but it's kind of a weird plant. If you dug up an old Heuchera, it's not a typical root system like you see in a lot of plants. I mean, you almost got like a thick taproot stock and not much else. They're easy to divide. You know, let's do it this way, because the two tips I would give you on Heuchera that I've learned over the years is once in the fall. Now, the reason I have a lot of these is because I want to see that color all the way through the winter. I don't want it buried in leaves. I don't want to see it disappear. When my maples drop their foliage, everything's going dormant here in another month, and I've got a carpet of leaves. If I just blow it all into my beds and walk away, I have buried that thing with foliage. It's going to turn brown, and I'm not going to see it all winter. It's going to have to start over again next year. So I would try taking a minute at some point when all the big trees have dropped their foliage and walk around the yard. I'm not saying be as OCD as me and clean up everything, but I'll walk around the clumps like that, take a second, slough all the leaves off the crown, get myself a little perimeter set. It's going to keep the slugs from laying eggs in there and being sheltered all winter, for one, but I'm also going to keep the sun, whatever sun we do get, and air circulation on it. So that's going to really cut my disease down and give me a happier plant. So my routine is simply this. I walk out usually in August every year, no matter if it's in the pot, the ground, shade, sun, all over my yard. I got them everywhere. And I will walk around with my bucket. I'm not going to spend hours, you know, hand picking this and that, but I'll get to spend flowers off of them. I will usually grab, you know, I can look at that plant. Everyone can see the beautiful crown I'm going to enjoy all winter. I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need these big old leaves. So a lot of times I can just snap them off my hand or prune the kind of the perimeter and get that extra foliage out of there. And now again, I got a brand new looking plant that's going to look sharp all winter. Then I do the same thing every April or so. You know, walk around, okay, what got hit in the winter a little bit, clean up the bad leaves, got a brand new crown that looks great the entire spring and summer that way. So cleaning them up, you know, once at least, but twice a year. If you do spring, I think most people do spring, so it looks great during the summer. But if you want it to look a little better in the fall, I give it just a quick little 30-second clean up and clean the debris out of there here in the fall, and you'll have a much better looking plant over the winter time. Yeah.
I'm really struggling with the lighter colored
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, they've got air. I clean them up.
Yeah,
but
get rust. Yeah. This is the one color, I'll be honest, I haven't found a limey yellow one that's done very well for me long term to date. I mean, this is lime marmalade. It's as good as any we've tried, but every time I put it in, it's more for shade again than sun. I get rust on it. I mean, I'll be honest, that's one, you know, I enjoy for a year or two, and it's like, yeah, you're out of here, I'll go try a different one again. The thing with Heuchera is, you can probably tell, there's new varieties every year. I know there's 3 or 4 breeds working on it. At some point there will be a better one that we'll find here as they come out, and that'll replace, you know, an old variety. I mean, we can, what's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, would they do better in a pot?
Well, I think a pot is okay. Again, this is the one that I brought in, and this is another one called Green Spice that's been around forever. And that's a fabulous variegated one. Yeah, and so those two tend to be, of the ones I brought in, a little bit more shade than sun. I don't have either of those two ever in afternoon sun. I have a sea of Green Spice back behind conifers, almost like a ground cover. I got probably 15 of them back there. It looks beautiful all through the season with that color combination that I wanted. The lime one, I still have a couple in my shade garden, but I do a lot more of the orange, the purples, the bright reds, the brighter colors. They'll take more sun. And again, the newer ones seem to be much more durable than old. You know, like as an example, you know, this is probably the latest, greatest one I've ever seen. Anyone tried Black Forest Cake yet? So I think that is the best combination of foliage color and flower I've seen to date in a Heuchera. So hey, it tastes good too. Black Forest Cake sounds delicious. But if you look at the picture, mine are still blooming. It is the brightest coral color flower you're ever going to see on coral bells. Figure that out finally. So a much better flower but I've had no foliage issues, and it is just dark purple black. I mean, just a really easy heuchera to grow. If I was going for purple, it would have been obsidian, you know, for years and years. I've got obsidian all over the place in my yard and sun. Groups of 5 here, 5 there, and 5 there to kind of get the color on the borders. But that is replacing it for me now. When I look for more purple, I go straight to Black Forest Cake or Forever Purple, because I think that's got some beautiful modeling on it. I think the Forever Red, the Forever Purple, those are all great varieties too in that whole series as well. Okay, I've still got my old Midnight Rose. That's the one variegated one, if you can see the leaf. Nice dark, but I got a little pink on it. I've got that in about half and half, you know, where I get shade, 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 and it's in the front of a shade garden. The back is very shaded, but the border does get some nice afternoon, evening sun. That's done very well for me there. I mentioned the green spice. I got way too many of those. This is Fire Alarm. So I want to kind of go more towards that orangey side of red a little bit. That's got some really nice foliage through the wintertime as well. We got the Chief. Probably this, if I was going for reds, you know, real deep bright red to red orange, it's going to be Fire Alarm. Fire Chief is probably the other one to look at for that. And then the couple of good orange ones. This is Northern Exposure Amber, and this one's actually done really pretty well for me in sun. A little bit more, I get better color in sun than shade. That'll have a nice mix, kind of ambers, orangey tones, a little bit of green in there as well. And I think this is the other one that I bought a bunch of a couple years ago that I've loved. This is kind of the boring season, I'll be honest. It doesn't have a huge amount of color, but still a really attractive heuchera. In the springtime, this has got some really nice orange on it. Orange, they call this one Orange Delight. So oranges and ambers mixed with the purple and the greens as well. Yeah, that's been a really good performer for me in my yard. So lots of different heucheras. You know, again, kind of like the hellebore discussion, we can feed our addiction by using them in pots, you know, for a little winter interest. And that's not one, I don't think I've ever bought one. You know, it's always give me 3 of them to put 3 in a little clump, or 5. Or in my containers, a lot of times I'll go, okay, if I get 3 Fire Alarms, I can use the 3 in the pots here for a year or two, mix with other things that I want, then I can take those 3 and go put them in the yard down the road too. So very, 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 very easy to do. You know, if we get, we had a place in Cleellum for years. You know, heuchera is very hardy. I think people would be surprised how low these go as far as temperature. You know, even over there, buried in 2-3 feet of snow in a typical winter, they are evergreen. But guess what? Snow melts. It might be mid-April. It's like, oh, here it comes again, right out of the soil, and off we go for another season. So, I mean, they are very hardy, the vast majority of the heucheras, too, as well. Okay? I didn't bring any Epimediums. Does everyone kind of know Epimediums? Because that's another evergreen perennial. I think it's pretty useful. I've used quite a bit of Epimediums in my own yard because they do deep, dark shade, and specifically dry shade with literally 0 maintenance. If I got an old cedar tree, you know, Douglas fir, I don't have either of those in my yard, or I would have more shade than I do. But the back corners in the shade garden that we don't really get much water to, you know, I'm able to put Epimediums back there, you know, 20 years ago even, that just slowly keep getting a little bit larger every year, but they fill space, they keep the weeds down, they look attractive, they're low, and I don't have to water them. And it's probably one of the easiest plants, I think, to grow. I think they're really pretty over the winter. A lot of times they turn red, but don't go brown. And then in springtime, we're right back to green again with really pretty new leaves and a nice flower as well. February, March, so kind of late winter, really early spring, we get some flower power on in addition as a nice bonus. So Epimediums is another one I'd think about being evergreen. If I was to give you maybe one tip on those, and it's not every year, I don't want you to think I do this every year, but probably every 3 years, I will walk out to all my clumps. I probably got 6, 7 of them now in different areas of the garden, and say, okay, I'm going to let you start over again. So I'm not going to spend hours, you know, cutting every little stem into my bucket. I usually grab my hedge clippers, to be honest with you, kind of lay them on the ground and just run through it like this, cut all the stems off like early February, put them in the yard waste. Now I just get brand new fresh leaves that start the season off, and I can really see the flowers that way too. So depending on the variety of Epimedium that I do, I can go with white flower, pink flower, yellow flowers. Even some orangey tones on some are very pretty as well. I've got a couple different ones at my place, but all have very similar foliage and very similar growth habit as well. Okay? Yes?
I love them.
Yeah,
But
I do too.
I've had a little trouble getting a group of them going. It's under cedar trees, tends
Yeah.
to be dry.
Yeah,
I've actually found that I have to water those
a little bit to get them
guys
going.
for
Yeah.
like 2 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I wouldn't say
Get
that.
them going.
Well, and I wouldn't say that's uncommon at all, because
Okay.
I could buy the most drought tolerant thing on earth, and that doesn't mean I will plant it and walk away.
You got it.
It means I got probably, like you said, 2, maybe 3 years. Let me get you a little bit of water to get that root system developed. Then down the road, you're going to walk away again. I was the same way when I put mine in years ago. It wasn't like I put them in the corners and walked away. I tried to remember that first summer, 2, 3. Okay, when I'm out here watering, let's make sure we keep those moist so they can get an adequate root system, get established, and then we're drought tolerant.
They're glorious.
Yeah, really easy plant. I mean, I've had them grow anywhere. I've had some, and again, you can let them put as many as you want them, and you can almost have a ground cover of it. It would look almost like a ground cover in a massive area. I take a piece off the edge of mine once in a while, like, ooh, you're not going to come any farther. I like this plant there. But it's not like it's crazy invasive, I think, like typical ground covers are. We just get it going everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, very cool plant.
Survives dogs pretty well.
What's that? Yeah, dogs, you can step on it. I got 2 young boys. They hit balls into it, soccer balls, everything else, and they hardly ever do any damage. So they have to meet him. That's an easy one. Bergenia is next on this handout there. And that's what I always laugh. It always makes me smile. Pig squeak. I'm not sure where they got that name from, but we call it pig squeak here. Bergenia always reminds me of my grandmother, rest in peace. She had a driveway down in Lake Forest Park. As a kid, I used to be down there for a couple weeks every summer. Probably half a mile driveway up a hill, rockery. My grandpa built back World War II time, and it literally was filled with Bergenia, every nook and cranny of the entire rockery. So it was always my job as the oldest grandson to come down and clean up her Bergenia for her every summer when I was down there visiting grandma. So I've always had a soft spot for it. I think it's a cool plant either way. It's kind of an old-fashioned one. I think this has been around for a lot of gardeners for years. But it's a fun plant when we talk about winter. I mean, it is evergreen. I get some beautiful color. We're getting into fall here, so I'm getting the burgundies and the reds and the leaves. They do have some nice texture and always have a really pretty flower come springtime. I mean, it's a little bit of an old school, maybe common plant, but it certainly still serves its purpose. Whether we use it in the garden, we put it in the pots, as a nice little winter plant. Some of the newer ones are a little smaller. I would say that's probably the biggest difference. It doesn't have to be old school Bergenias. There's a lot of new ones that are like half the size foliage. You can do white bloom, dark pink, light pink, some different colors now as well. But certainly look at your options. I think it's a worthy plant, certainly for consideration. Again, whether we're talking about adding it to a little winter container or using it as an evergreen out in the garden as well. Okay. Bergenia is still a fun one. I brought in these 2 just because I think a lot of this is a really 2 common questions I get, whether it's this time of year, January, May, summer, it doesn't matter. It seems a lot of people growing rosemary and lavender. We talk about drought tolerance. This is the opposite of a lot of stuff we've talked about today. I want that out in the hottest, driest spot in my whole yard to keep it happy. And I want to be careful on how I prune them, is what we're going to talk about today a little bit. So if I have lavender going into the winter, or rosemary, they're evergreen. I'm not interested in walking out right now and cutting them back or anything like that. But typically when they're done blooming, I brought this one up intentionally because he's got his last couple flowers. If I don't deadhead lavender, what happens? I see the lady I drive by downtown here every day with the 3-foot woody stalk of lavender and a little frosting of flowers on top. And if that's her thing, that's fine. But I think most people go to the Squim Lavender Festival, or they go look at a lavender farm like, why can't I have that? Just huge low pin cushions that are in maximum flower. That's pruning. So if I walk away from lavender and don't prune, I'm going to end up with a leggier, woodier plant. If I prune this, I'm going to have a compact, nice, full, heavy blooming lavender. It's really as simple as that. You want to do this coming out of winter for sure, but if that plant right there is planted in my yard and I take this home today and put it in, I'm walking out next spring and I'm cutting that in half. I'm cutting that thing in half, and I want it low and I want it dense. Now it's going to leaf out, spread, have a nice pincushion look, and I'm going to start blooming. And then when the flowers are dry, I'm going to cut it down below the flowers again, and then it's going to bloom again, and I'm going to keep doing that until I get my mature lavender. Yes?
What if it's already woody?
Well, that's when you probably want to cross your fingers and toes, like next April, and go, okay, what's going to happen if I zip this off and I cross my fingers and toes? Will it come back? And a lot of times it will.
Okay.
But if it doesn't, okay, let's just get another one, and now I prune it right, and we're good to go. This is what I did to my wife when we got married about 15 years ago. She wanted lavender on the wedding. Oh, I want to put that in the yard when we're done. I was like, all right. So I thought I'd teach her an early lesson. So she put 3 in, and I did not prune them on purpose. And I kept saying, hey, you probably want to go out, cut those lavenders back a little bit when they're done blooming, and she never did. And about 3 years went by, and she's like, I don't really like that lavender anymore. Can you get it out of here? And I was like, well, that's the reason. It's just lack of pruning. Yeah, it's really that simple. They don't need a lot of water. You shouldn't have to feed them a lot. It's not that kind of thing with lavender. It's hot sun and it's dry. I mean, it really is that simple. This is in English. I brought up a couple others. You know, you'll see some gray, some green, some variation in the foliage. There's always a nice mix with different lavenders. This one in particular is called Platinum Blonde. I really am liking this one these days. Got variegated foliage with the dark flowers, very nice. But I can get blues, I can get purples, whites, a little pink even on occasion. I've got some options for flower. The biggest decision you're going to have to make with lavender is going to be what type. Typically it's English, French, or Spanish. Now I would only do English or French if you want my honest opinion. I think Spanish lavender does not do well here. Everybody buys it because it's got the same flower. It's always got those 2 little rabbit ear little petals on the top. And I drive around everywhere here in the winter, and typically 90% of them are done in one season. It's too wet here. They just like extra dry. They're all like zone 7 or zone 8 hardy. English lavender, French, you're talking about zone 2, zone 3, zone 4. So if we get a cold winter, Spanish lavender is done. If it's not in perfect drainage, Spanish lavender is done. And you're going to see this kind of stuff thriving a lot easier up here as well. So you're more than welcome to try one. If the only times I've ever done Spanish, because it is a cute little flower, is in a pot, because then I can watch it a little more carefully, plant it with other stuff that's hot and dry. If we did get a cold spell coming, like anything in the teens, it's probably going to be done with Spanish lavender. So we get cold, and I can shove that pot and protect it for a little bit. Yes?
I've got a Spanish lavender that I planted on kind of a slope.
Yep, that would be the spot to try.
It's been there 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's had babies.
Still thrive. Yeah, and see, that's the spot to do it. I see commercial landscapes using them a little bit more than English, which they probably shouldn't. But if I'm on a slope, I've got great drainage, you're probably going to be okay.
It's under a carpet rose.
I think for most people that are trying one, I'm not trying to tell you don't ever buy Spanish, you're more than welcome to try. But if you want to play it safe, I would always go English or French. I think you've got a much greater chance of having those thrive long term. Okay?
It's hard to keep it looking good. It looks real sprawly.
Yeah, and again, it still would be same pruning. You got to get that thing coming out of winter, and then probably lavender's probably 2 or 3 times a year, just a quick little shear job down to keep it low and keep it full. The other one I brought in was rosemary, and rosemary, I think one of the coolest things is that's always going to bloom at the tail end of winter. So that is not a plant I'm ever going to go out and prune back in the fall, the winter. I'm going to let it bloom if that's what I'm going to use it for, as a nice flower. It gets a really pretty bluish little light blue flower on it. I'm going to let that thing bloom, and then I'm going to prune after bloom. So this is probably like a mid-April, May thing in our neck of the woods. If I'm going to cut my rosemary back, I'm going to let it flower, I'm going to cut it back, and then I've got the summer for it to flush. I can harvest some for the barbecue and use it all the same ways as well, okay? Now be really careful, lavender and rosemary are similar in this respect. There's a lot of flavors of rosemary out there on the market, and they've given them all kinds of fun names like barbecue and Roman beauty and all these ones that make you say, ooh, that tastes good, I want to take that home. A lot of that stuff, again, is zone 8. Be really careful what variety you choose. If I was growing rosemary in my yard, that would be one of the only ones I would ever do, an old one called ARP, A-R-P. That's down to zone 6. So if I have good drainage, I've got hot sun, I'm not worried about that getting damaged here in cold spells in the winter. If I had any of the other stuff that's zone 8, I think you're going to get a little bit of foliage damage through the winter time here. We always have 1 week where it's like, okay, 5 straight days down in the teens, maybe single digits at night. That's going to damage some stuff like that where it would not on a variety like art. Okay, so if you want a little shrubbier, you know, this is a bigger plant for sure. Lavender, I can keep low, have a nice evergreen perennial for the winter time, get some flowering going come spring, and off we go for a year. Rosemary is going to be a little bit bigger, a little shrubbier, and there's some prostrate ones that are fine. But I want a little bit more shrub structure to probably a rosemary and a little bit more height. But it's the same, to me, growing conditions. Super well drained soil and probably the hottest spot in your yard, and that's where we want to use both of those.
Could it go into like a big pot, like with daffodils and stuff
Oh yeah,
like that?
for sure. Yeah, that'd be fine. Great one for containers. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
thank
great
you.
one for containers. Now the next one on there, Euphorbia. We got just a couple left. So I brought in a few Euphorbias. Anybody got a couple of those? Yeah. So Euphorbia, to some extent, is one of those plants that I always call the gifts that keep on giving. If you let your Euphorbia go to flower in the spring, which is really pretty on all of them, and then dry and go to seed, you're probably going to have quite a few Euphorbias popping up where that one if it's in well-drained soil. So I always enjoy the flower on mine. It's not like I go out there and cut the flowers off because they are really pretty come spring, but I don't let them dry. At some point I walk out and that's when I get cut back, is after bloom. Cut them back, deadhead them at least, then I will not have the volunteers to grow. If you want the volunteers, you like Al Natural, let them go to seed. You'll have plenty of Euphorbia in that garden area down the road. There's quite a bit now that doesn't belong here that really goes to seed that's been put on the noxious weed list. There's a few Euphorbias you will not find at nurseries anymore because it goes above and beyond the reproductive line as far as taking over native habitats. But for us, we tend to go for, you know, again, ones that bloom, but it's foliage color to me. I mean, you can look at those 4 right there, 4 easy options, totally different foliage to contrast. And some really fun, some fun winter time with that evergreen on there. So you've got Glacier. I'll bring them over here so we can see them a little better. And this is a good example too. You'll see the same with the Heucheras. You know, save yourself some money. You know, I buy a gallon, you know, about the same size plant, get a quart. You know, save yourself a bunch of dollars and get a quart. It's the same with Euphorbia, Heucheras, a lot of times the same thing. We can get the same plant in a gallon or a quart and I'll have just about the same size plant, save $7-8 each, you know, kind of thing. So Euphorbia, no different. We carry some in quarts. This is one called Glacier Blue. If you like a little bit of bluish with the light variegation, that's really bright. Again, these are all hot sun. So something like Glacier Blue, Ascot Rainbow. You know, if you want to go bold, there's my colors right there. I like my golds and oranges and all kinds of fun. That's a really pretty plant, even nice stem color. You know, that's a really pretty one. We've got stuff like Blackbird. You know, if I want to go super dark, there's other ones like that too. And we don't have, I was hoping we had Rudolph in. We always have that one for Christmas, but it looks like little red tips like Rudolph's nose. This is Red Martini. So there's another one with a little bit of red towards the top, but also some green too, you know, that kind of nice color combination. But we do always have, you know, some Euphorbias, and again, out there, gallon, if I go up to the seasonal department, which it doesn't mean that it's all annual, I'll find a lot of those little perennials and shrubs and little small starts, especially if I'm going into a container. Get a little bit of life in there that way. So the one maybe caution I'll tell you that's going to be very similar to the rosemary and lavender, it's going to be sun and drainage. We do not want to put Euphorbias in shade. They're going to perform much, much better in full sun. Pruning them after bloom is the key. And it doesn't bother my skin, but I don't know if any of you have done Euphorbias. They're pretty milky when I get out to pruning time, and you got to be real careful with the skin. I would put gloves on for sure. Some people, you'll get a pretty good rash from that sap when we're doing some pruning on them and things. So it bothers some and doesn't bother others. I'm probably leather skin hand, didn't bother me as much. But certainly, like my mother's always got her gloves on when she's out messing with hers. Yeah, you don't want to get the rash from it. So not much, again, pruning this time of year, but fast forward till spring, you know, watch the flower, enjoy them when they bloom, and then cut those flower stalks out, or that's when we would cut it back to let it kind of start over again for the next season, okay? I didn't have much Saxifrage left out there. We'll have a whole bunch come spring again. I was kind of surprised we got cleaned out here this fall. But that's a perennial I use quite a bit in my yard too. I don't know if you guys have tried Saxifrage a little bit. Lots of options for shade, for sun, some great foliage. They're almost succulent looking a little bit. Long bloom seasons on most of them, spring through summer or summer through fall. But there's some really good Saxifrages out there. I would invite you to look up a few and see what catches your eye. But just pay attention to that sun versus shade. You know, I've got one like, say, it's a good example, like London Pride is an old variety, beautiful yellow variegated foliage, real low, almost like a ground cover. I've got a really nice patch of that in deep dark shade, and it looks great year round. Gets a beautiful flower come spring. I've got other ones like the Turin series that are the opposite. I've got them out in the hot sun by the front door, and I bought those. They have nice foliage, but I bought that for the flower. You know, I think it has a nice flower. It looks like a ground cover, but doesn't get too crazy. And they would like more sun than shade. So there really is some pretty good saxifrage for many different little niches in the garden space for sure. Okay. Maybe if I gave you a couple, if you're going for foliage, I think you'll find quite a bit of cool ones. If you're going for flower, look at some of the newer series. That Turin series came out probably 3 years ago now. They keep bringing other colors. We can do white, we can do light pink, dark pink, deep red, light red, some different tones. That's the one to me, if I'm going for flowers, bloom the longest. I probably have 6 months of flower out of that, starting in February, March, going all the way into the midsummer or so on most years. And really low maintenance again. Okay? Now, last couple I brought in on this side here. I got a couple I didn't even put on my list, but I'll show you a couple more things. Now, one plant, you know, we talked about Hellebores a little bit, you know, coming to me in May when the place is ransacked and it's Mother's Day week, the busiest week of the year, and saying, well, where's your Hellebores? There's nothing left until the fall. This is the other plant that would be like that, hardy cyclamen. Has anyone got hardy cyclamen?
They are so fun.
It's a really cool plant. You know, this is evergreen. It's not evergreen, but it is for our discussion because this looks good all through the winter. This is all about fall, winter, spring. These would go dormant in the summer. So the opposite of kind of most plants around here. This is a plant that's really hard for nurseries to get. I mean, we're lucky we have a lady down in town that I call like 6 months ago every year and say, don't forget about us, we'll take all you got. And so we get some really cool cyclamens from a local place right here in Marysville. The two main species we'll see is cyclamen coum. It's got more of a rounded leaf like that. And then we have cyclamen heterofolium. That's the kind of I call the ivy leaf cyclamen. So both of these plants are just about to bloom. This is a plant I'm going to get my little flowers starting up here when it's cold here all through the winter to spring. But I'm going to have that sweet foliage to look at. I probably have 200 plants that, well, I mean, I got 200 left, maybe 100, 120 or so left up there. And if we laid them all out in a line, every single one of them looks different. I mean, that's how cool cyclamen is. If we look at the coum, you know, one will have half that silver, one will have mottling, one's got light green, dark green. Every one of them has got a different leaf, because I think that's one of the cool things about cyclamen is mixing them together, letting them kind of naturalize a little bit. And the same with the heterofolium. Flowers are going to be white, light pink to dark pink, and again, that one species is going to have a huge range of flowers. So if you want the bloom, pick them out when you see them flowering. If you're like me and you're going for the foliage and the bloom's a bonus, go get them soon, because once they're gone, they're gone. I won't see them again until next October. Yes?
I've never got any because I always thought they were super fragile.
They are not fragile. This is actually, I wish we could find the bulbs, or the coums is actually what they grow from, because it would grow from a bulb. You can do mail order sometimes and find some online. We just haven't been able to find them for years. It's probably been 15, 20 years since I've seen somebody who sold, like, oh, here, take this bulb home and plant it, and off the plant goes the next year kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're super fragile, but I do have to have good drainage again. I can't be wet, and it's got to be in a woodland garden. This is not a plant I'm going to put out in much sun at all. So if I've got the dappled shade underneath trees mixed with gardens and that kind of thing, that's where they should be. Little moss growing around it and all kinds of fun stuff in the garden that way. So definitely more shade, and for sure well drained. If I buy one of those, you know, again, it's not like it goes like that. It's slow and steady, but I'm going to have a really nice patch of it as it matures. This isn't one that just sits there. It's going to keep getting a little bit bigger every year as the coom develops. Then off we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So cyclamen, one thing I brought in, I should add wintergreen to my list because, you know, what do you call this? A shrublet, a ground cover, whatever you want. We'll call it a little perennial for the class. Because that's another plant, some really good varieties of wintergreen out these days. And if we're talking about fall, winter, spring, that's an outstanding plant to tuck in the garden or again in containers. A lot of times those come home with me in the pots because I can use it as a filler and kind of a spiller. It doesn't go crazy as a ground cover, but I get that little accent plant on the edge of the pot with foliage color that just bloomed and is going to give me all those bright berries for the winter time. We can do white now, you can do pink berries now. I think cherry berries is my favorite one now because the berries are just huge. You know, that's another new variety. There's a great variegated one up there called Winter Splash. If you're into foliage again, same bloom, red berry, but now I've got pink, white, and green on the foliage, which is very attractive. Again, either in the garden in mostly shade or in the container as well. Okay. There's a few ferns I bring in. You know, I think if we have shade, you know, mostly shade, morning sun. I mean, some ferns will take a pretty good sun as well, but it's typically, again, kind of that woodland garden or a shady container. Again, a lot of times in the shade garden pots, that's what I'll use for a kind of a thriller if I'm looking to revamp it for the winter. But I'm going to look for evergreen stuff like tassel fern, deer fern, autumn fern is perfect from Japan. Got a little bit of fall, but this doesn't go brown and go dormant in the winter. I've always got those fronds. I have some of this in the garden. You know, my fronds are up about 2 feet, but it makes a beautiful clump, and that's in deep dark shade underneath some Japanese maples in the backyard. But it adds interest through the winter time, and that particular one's got a little bit of foliage color on it as well. Okay, so lots of good ferns. And then the last one here is grasses. You know, grasses to me, you know, add motion, they got texture, we got color. In particular, evergreen ones like this, again, I can add in pots or add them on the border to add a little bit of interest. A lot of the Carex, I have this one and I've got another one called Ever Lime, but those bright Carex, I don't even know if you came by my house in August, you would even know they were in my garden. You know, they're buried by dahlias and perennials and shrubs, and oh, I think there's a grass back there. But when everything goes dormant now, the leaves are cleaned up, the perennials are down for the winter, the plants are bare, now it's like, oh wow, look at that. I got huge gold clumps, you know, that are in the shade or part shade all up underneath that garden. Really add some nice interest. Yeah.
My terror about grasses is spreading.
Yeah.
The
new ones are better than the old Carex, this one in particular. The old varieties, you know, Ice Dancer, you know, the old Evergold, they probably get a little bit more aggressive maybe than some of the newer ones do. We can always deadhead the seeds. I do that with a couple of my Carex. So they bloom in spring. Yeah. I'll just pull the seed stalks out if I don't want them to go to seed anywhere, kind of thing.
Because I have some, I think they look like that.
Yeah.
And they, you know, I've dug them up and moved them and they were all huge and kill everything around them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I live in an area that's got a lot of invasive grasses.
Yeah.
And so I'm terrified of grasses.
Yeah.
My friend gave me a couple that haven't spread. So can I talk to people and they'll say, no, they'll just clump.
No, there's a couple that would go crazy spread. I mean, I don't ever do like Mexican feathergrass. The stipas tend to go to seed everywhere a little bit. Mm-hmm. But these ones are usually not so bad. I've had every one of the ones I brought up here either in my yard or in a pot multiple times, and I haven't had any issues with a lot of these self-seeding or propagating themselves.
Okay, thank you.
The biggest probably thing that usually people ask me about the evergreen grasses is, well, it browns out in spring. It doesn't look very good. How do I prune it? What do I do to clean it up? I can never take an evergreen grass. Let's pretend this went through the winter. You know, I've got a couple of old blades here. You know, it is, you know, it's just a grass. But if I come out of winter and this has got brown tips or it looks ratty, you know, going along and doing this is not going to fix my problem. I'm just going to have another brown layer where I cut. So if I'm going to really say, let's start you over again, I'm going to grab this thing literally like hair, and I'm going to cut the entire plant off about 3-4 inches above the soil, put some food on it, and I'm going to let it start over again. That's like a 1st of April thing in the spring. So leave it alone in the winter, cut it back real hard, feed it, and then off we go, you know, come springtime. We can get it back into shape a little bit. But there's some, you know, these are all clumpers. You know, the Carex, this is one called Eversheen. This is Feather Falls. It's got a little longer blade. I don't ever use that in my garden, to be honest with you. That's a really common one I do in my pots because it trails down a little bit more, again, to soften the container. We've got Evergold. You know, if I want a little lighter, subtle yellow, I can do that. This is New Zealand or orange sedge. This is probably the most common grass I use in my yard. I love the color. It's just short, about a foot tall. It's not quite as low. And again, this is one I can always use in the container. Cut it off, throw it out in the yard, and off we go for another year. I have these all over the place at my own house. And as long as I got good drainage and a good amount of sun, I think you'll be okay. There's some other varieties of these we keep in the shade. We want to keep a little bit, keep them out of the afternoon sun some, but these would all take full sun. The two hot blue ones here are oatgrass and fescue. So again, this would be a lot like our lavender, our euphorbia discussion, where I might start those over in the spring. That's fine. They're easy to cut off and let them rejuvenate. But if I'm struggling with these, it's because they're not getting enough sun and it's too wet in the wintertime. So if I go slope, high and dry, I have these right by where I park my truck in a rockery, and I never touch them. It's just beautiful blue. That it's kind of like the Heucheras thing or Hellebores. Every 2-3 years, okay, I'm going to cut you off, let you start over again. It's almost just like mowing the lawn, like fescue. Cut them back, and I get a brand new plant to start over again. Oatgrass will get a little taller. You know, if I wanted something about 2 feet, little seeds on top, oatgrass would be the little taller version of that too. Yeah.
I got a grass called Northern Lights that they said would grow in full shade. Is that true?
Yeah, Deshampsia does okay for shade. Yeah, for sure. That's a pretty versatile one. That and moorgrass, Melina, you can almost grow just about anywhere. Yeah, those are both.
Pretty.
Yeah, it's a great grass. Yeah, it turns some pretty colors. Let's see if I can think did I get all the plants up here?
Yep.
I think we got all of them. So just try, you know, this is kind of one of those fun classes for me. It's like almost 4 or 5 classes in one. We get a little taste of all kinds of different stuff. But the biggest thing, again, I mean, it's the most common question I get asked every year for 30 years, going back to my white days, is how do I make my yard look good all year? What do I need to add? It's like, well, the easy thing, just come down to the nursery like once a month and find something that looks good, because we always have what's in season. But plan for all year, because it doesn't have to be boring in the wintertime. I love deciduous plants, love maples. I'd never get rid of. I'm not a... doesn't keep its leaves, I'm getting rid of it, because there's a lot of gardeners like that up here too. But we want the seasonality, but we still want to look out in the wintertime and see some fun stuff. So again, whether it's pots, border plantings, spots by the door, anywhere you're going to visit, you're going to enjoy it in the wintertime, look at some of the evergreen perennials, because there are some pretty fun stuff up here. Yeah.
I got rid of my front lawn 2 years ago and planted it with all this gorgeous stuff, and realized afterwards everything I planted was deciduous.
Oh yeah.
It was incredibly ugly.
Yeah, all in the wintertime.
So
yeah.
now we're working on.
We just get a little mix going, yeah. Because I mean, I always have deciduous. That's another real common thing I hear from people is I don't want it to lose its leaves. Well, I can see that in a lot of spots in the yard, but you should not have an entirely evergreen yard. You want fall colors outstanding right now. I drove back over Highway 2 this week from some meetings over in Idaho, and the colors in the pass, unbelievable, way better than anything you'd ever see in a yard. You know, and I would never, that's why I like my maples. I got burning bush, I got all kinds of deciduous, but I got plenty of evergreen too, because that's the whole thing with garden is a nice balance, you know, kind of using all the above. Yeah. So if you want to do some shopping, well, you've already got some cyclamen, look at that. So if you want to do some shopping, you got today, you got tomorrow, you got all the way through Friday. So you're just telling me you're at the class. You got 20% on all the perennials in the inventory. So that's little guys up front, big stuff out here, whatever you want to find. Like I said, a lot of Hellebores and Heucheras and grasses a lot of times too. You know, if I want a little bigger plant, you know, we're not going to talk you out of spending the money and getting a gallon. But if you're like, you know, maybe instead of one, a lot of times this is what I choose. Instead of buying 1 gallon, I'm going to go get 3-4 inch. Because now I can make a little bigger spread. I can let them develop. I'm going to have that size plant next spring. You know, when the leaf's out, I'm going to have the same size plant anyway. So save a little money, or get more, more quantity for the same amount of cash. So especially with being a Heuchera addict, these two are not cheap perennials. The price of Heucheras and Hellebores have gone up substantially in my lifetime. Not quite as much as I paid for the original one back in the day. But I'm always like, I'm going to go see if Holly has quartz up there before I take one home. So a lot of times that's what I'll do. Instead of buying a gallon, I'll just take 3 little quarts, and I got a little bigger area, and now I got 3 plants to play with versus just the one. So not all of them are available all the time in small pots, but there is a pretty good selection up there of some quart and 4-inch Heucheras. Definitely quart Hellebores right now. There's a few quart Euphorbias, and then lots of grasses up there too. So thanks for coming.